Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ba'd. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to purify our hearts and our hearing and to take what will be beneficial to us and leave anything which will be harmful to us. Ameen. So I've been given the topic of Islamic economy during the golden ages, and I'm just going to talk very briefly about the golden ages, but talk primarily about Islamic economy, how it works, how we can understand it, and what you should be looking at or thinking about when you start to make your own money, get your own jobs, build your own businesses, and have your own careers. So the Muslim world, and when I say the Muslim world, I'm referring to countries that had a Muslim majority population or where Islam was in a position of dominance and authority historically. The Muslim world, in the region of the Muslim world, actually had one of the most vibrant economies in the history of the world, particularly from the 9th century to the 14th century. This was known as the golden age or the golden era of Islam. So sometimes we learn about scientific advancements. Sometimes we learn about medicinal advancements of how Muslims invented these cool things. They were very advanced in technology. They were advanced in science. They were advanced in chemistry, periodic tables right there. But what they were also advanced in, and many people may not recognize this, is that they were advanced in economics. Now, what does that mean to be advanced in economics? Right? So they had one of the most vibrant economies, not only because of their military power, not only because of their political structure, but one of the reasons why they had such a lucrative and such a successful economy was because of the type of contracts that they were engaging in. And that's very significant for us to understand, because if we can redevelop a similar type of innovation in contracts, we can actually move the economy forward. A lot of people don't understand that economy is not only based on your political power or your military power or your strategies, but the contract plays a really big role. So, what did the Muslim world develop? They developed economic concepts and economic techniques that actually caused the Muslim world to become very wealthy. So for example, various forms of partnerships. If you read a book on Islamic law, it's called fiqh, you'll find that there's so many different types of partnerships. There's limited partnerships, there's unlimited partnerships, there's musharaka, mutanaqisa. There's so many different ways of engaging in a type of partnership transaction. There is venture capital partnerships known as mudaraba or qiran. Like we're at Stanford University. If you look at the history of Stanford University, they are one of the top universities in the world for students who have produced a lot of companies and a lot of wealth in the trillions of dollars. Part of it has to do with the venture capital that's being put into those companies, whether it's Google or whether it's some other technology company, Hewlett-Packard or whatever it is. So this plays a major role in the type of structure that you have. Then there's agency, what's called tawkil. When you have somebody else acting on your behalf, what's called like power of attorney. They developed that. This was not allowed in Roman law. So in Roman law, they were not allowed to have a contract where someone could be an agent on behalf of another person to execute an economic contract. They had a value transfer system. Their endowments were massive. Like for example, Stanford University is one of the highest endowments in the world. They have $34 billion endowment. So it's called a waqf or awqaf. So an endowment is something where you put money in a certain place, you structure it in a way that this has to be used for this particular thing, where no individual owns this money anymore. The money is transferred into a kind of a fictitious vehicle or to a project where it's not owned by an individual. This is something that a lot of places did not understand. So if you always rely on independent individual money being invested, you're going to have control coming from that money. Think about individuals who complain about their local masjid. We got politics and we got uncles and some aunties and they're trying to control the masjid and all that. When you have an endowment, now someone has given something charitable, they don't have very limited, restricted control over that, but the amount of money is going to continue to be invested. It's going to continue to be used for that particular cause and that project. There are contract systems. They used common currency. They invented the idea of a check. There were promissory notes. There was pawning. In the 9th century, you could go to a bank in Baghdad, interest-free, non-bank, like not a haram bank. You can go to a bank in Baghdad and you could go and cash that money, cash that check all the way in Morocco. If you look on a map and you see how far that is, that's a really big thing for the 9th century. So what happens is Muslims lost that economy due to several reasons after their golden ages. What arose? The Western civilization. Western civilization rose up partly because of the type of contracts that they had. And their contracts were based on two main things that led to their, in addition to military and political, two main types of contracts that they had, which are still the foundation of the economic system today. And that is, number one, the idea of developing a corporation. And a corporation is an entity where you form it, it can declare bankruptcy, it acts as an individual person, so someone cannot go after your assets. That made a really big difference. And then the idea of cooperative insurance actually boomed the economy as well in the West. So that was all I want to say about the golden age of Islam. Now coming to what I actually really want to tell you is that the reason why Muslims were so successful, the Western civilization has been successful, other economies have been successful. But what's important is the Muslim economy was one of the strongest in the world while abiding by the just principles of Islam, which means they didn't need to compromise. Which means that today what happens with many Muslims, they're like, well, we can't live in a system without engaging in riba and engaging in interest, so we simply have to work within the system that we have. Okay, on a temporary individual level, maybe you need to deal with a few things. But if we're going to look at a macro level, and we're going to look at, hey, how can we potentially develop some type of system for the world as well as for the Muslim society and the Muslim community, we need to understand some very basic fundamental principles of Islam that I want to talk about. 3 main principles, because I only have like 20 minutes to present here, and then Q&A. So this is like, I have an 8-hour seminar on Islamic economics. It's on YouTube on my channel. But this is the super condensed version. 3 things you need to know. Number 1 is zakah. Zakah is a pillar of Islam. You should have learned it in your Sunday school class. You should have learned it somewhere. Zakah is what percentage of your wealth? Can anybody tell me? 2.5%. So what you do is, every single year, whatever money you have, if you have $20,000, your students, you probably don't have anything. But once you get some money, right, some of you do. Once you get a little bit of money, you're going to start paying zakah. Zakah is a pillar of Islam. Zakah is not optional. There are many Muslims, many Muslims, they don't know how much zakah is, and or they don't pay their zakah. It's a shame. It's a pillar of Islam, right? So you got to pay your zakah, 2.5% every single year on the wealth that you have. If you have $20,000, put in 20,000 into a calculator, divide by 40, or you multiply by 0.025 to get 2.5%, and you got to pay that amount of money. How does this affect economics? You want to be investing your money. So if you're a Muslim and say, you know what, there's so many haram investments out there, I'm just going to keep my money in the bank. I'm going to get a job. Let's say I make extra $20,000 that I don't spend, and I keep on saving that money over a long period of time, and I hope one day I'm going to be able to get married, and then I'm going to get a house, and I'm going to get a this, and I'm going to get a that. What's going to happen to you is that every year you're going to pay zakah on that money. And that means you're going to be losing 2.5% on the savings that you have. So from an Islamic perspective, if you wanted your money to simply be stored and just retain its value because you're giving 2.5%, you should invest that money into something so that it's at least getting a gain of 2.5%. If you get a 2.5% return on any investment, stock market, whatever it may be, real estate, then you're actually at zero profit because you have to be giving your money to the poor, 2.5%. So what a Muslim's supposed to be doing is never allow your money to simply sit there idle because it's going to be going down in value. This is not a negative thing. Number 1, you're fulfilling a pillar of Islam. Number 2, you're helping people who are less in need. Number 3, you are recirculating wealth back into the community and the society rather than hoarding it up. And that actually helps build the economy. If you recirculate it within the Muslim community, even better. You see some sisters and they have a hijab business or whatever it is, you go and you buy the Islamic clothing or whatever. You see some guys, they're doing some kind of side programming gig, say, you know what, let me give them the business and it's going to circle the money within the Muslim community. So it accomplishes a lot of things. But then you have inflation. And with inflation, you have standard inflation at 2 to 3% every single year. So you want to be targeting even higher rate than simply 2.5%. You want to be trying to target at least a 5% so that you're not just losing the amount of money in your bank, and that's the bare minimum that you should be shooting for. So the concept of zakah, even though it's there to help the poor, it has a side effect. For every Muslim who takes their religion seriously, it has the side effect of making you realize that I cannot simply leave my money, sitting in a bank or under my bed or in a little safe or something like that, because it's going to constantly be going down, and I need to invest it. And when you invest it, you actually invest it within the economy. It's going to boost the economy rather than you simply hoarding it and sitting on it. So this is principle number 1. Principle number 2 is riba. Riba is interest. And some people, they're going to come and say, well, riba is this old term called usury, U-S-U-R-Y. And they say that if it's a large, exorbitant amount, then it's prohibited in Islam, but like a little amount is not prohibited in Islam or whatever it is. This is all completely baseless. Right? I spend like 2 hours, deconstructing this argument, in my other seminar and lecture. There's no basis for this. Riba in Islam is equivalent to interest on a loan at any value. So if you loan your friend $10 to go buy lunch, and you say, tomorrow, just give me $10.50. Haram. 100% clear cut. If he says, I'm going to pay you back in 1 year, and you're like, 1 year, I should pay zakah on that. I could have paid zakah on that. I am losing value, 3% inflation. My buying power from that money is not there. Can you at least give me $10 and a back rub? All right, because give me something, because I let you loan this money, I let you borrow this money for this period of time. You're not even allowed to take a penny or a favor or a gift, quote unquote gift, on top of whatever loan you gave. It all falls into the category of riba. Riba is any form of interest on a loan. Riba is a major sin in Islam. It's not something small. It's something really, really big. Which means what? Which means that if you want to buy something and you don't have the money for it, you're like, well, how am I going to get the money to buy this thing? In Islam, you only have 2 options. You're either going to get an interest-free loan, which the majority of people would not give you, unless it's your family or something like that. And the second option is to figure out some way to structure a partnership without involving any type of interest or riba at all. And what that's going to involve is profit loss and profit sharing. And that's exactly what boosted the Islamic economy historically. And this is what everyone needs to be putting in their mind. If I have something that I want to buy, if I want to buy this brand new smartphone, and I need 1 terabyte of data because I take so many videos in high quality, and I just can't live without this. But I don't have the money to buy this phone. How am I supposed to buy this phone? Can I borrow money from somebody else? No one's going to, give me a way to pay for it or whatever. In our mind, interest is out of the question for a Muslim. So what's the other option? It's what's called a partnership contract, where you have a profit loss sharing agreement, and you have to come up with some structure to say, hey, there's got to be a way that I can somehow get this thing, and both the investor as well as myself are going to be benefiting from it. And that's exactly what Muslims did. They began to develop contracts with these first 2 principles in mind, that we need to be investing our money, but we also need to make sure there is no riba at all, because it's a major sin. So we have nothing to do with that. We need to come up with something very clever where there's a benefit for the person, because the person's not going to give me an interest-free loan for no reason. So they're going to benefit, and I'm going to benefit, and their risk is going to be mitigated, and my risk is going to be mitigated. But if it goes down in value, we both lose. If it goes up in value, we both gain. Profit and loss sharing was the foundation of Islamic economy. And then principle number 3 is called gharar. Gharar means uncertainty. And if you want to look at the main 2 prohibitions in Islamic economics, there are these 2 principles. Number 1 is riba. Number 2 is gharar, uncertainty. What uncertainty means is that if there's a high level or even a medium level of uncertainty in a transaction, it was prohibited by the Prophet, peace be upon him. So if you come and say, you know what, hey, I got this, here's a box. It's got a bunch of items in it. It might have an item worth $100. It might have some items worth $1. And you put all these random boxes together, Some of the boxes have $100 item. Some of them have just like a bunch of junk $1 items. And you say, I'm going to sell these boxes for $20 a piece. And you're like, what if I buy the one for $20 and I get the one with the $100 gift inside? That's great. I mean, I might win. That is called gharar. That's called uncertainty. You're not sure exactly what you're buying. And it's of such a level where it's very significant. Who's going to pay $20 for 10 items that are worth $1 each? You could potentially get that. But then you're like, I could potentially get the box with 19 $1 items and one $100 item. Maybe I'm going to win that. So you're tempted now to put that money in. The Prophet, peace be upon him, prohibited that type of transaction. Now there's another type of gharar that the Muslim scholars encountered, and they're like, well, wait a minute, we got some issues. In Islamic history, in the Golden Age, they had these bathhouses where people would go and get like warm water and take baths. Europeans, they didn't shower. They didn't take baths. Really, this is the reality. Crusaders and stuff, they would like smell from a mile away. Nuns used to pride themselves. There were some nuns, you look at their story, they'll say, this nun, she's so pious, she's never showered in her entire life. She's a saint. Smelly, saint. But right? So like that was viewed as something that was like proud. They were proud of that in their religion. Zuhd, asceticism. You stay away from worldly things. Islam was the opposite. Islam was about cleanliness. So Muslims established these bath homes. You get warm water, you take a shower, you make ghusl, you make wudu, you do all that stuff. So then Muslim scholars said, hey, wait a minute. People walk into a bathhouse, and some guy's going to walk in there, he's going to use like 10 gallons of water. Another guy's going to walk in there, he's going to use 1 gallon of water, and the bathhouse is charging one price for admission. Gharar, uncertainty. So they say, what do we do with this situation? Is it such a high level of uncertainty or a lower level of uncertainty? So the exact same thing exists with all-you-can-eat places today. Some of you go to all-you-can-eat buffets. Some of you, I don't know, does anyone eat sushi? Anyone like sushi? Been to all-you-can-eat sushi place? So some people walk in there, mashallah, they can eat. So they pay $20 for unlimited all-you-can-eat, and they eat $65 worth of sushi. And then you see a guy like me, I get pressured in there, and I'm eating like $10 worth of sushi, and I'm getting ripped off. Right? But you know what? They've pre-calculated how many people are likely going to eat this much, and how many are going to eat this much. We're going to pay the price anyways. So there's something known as gharar. A small amount of uncertainty is overlooked. A large amount of uncertainty, like those boxes that they're selling, is not overlooked. This is the basis for all Islamic economics. So what we need room for innovation, what's called bid'ah, but like good bid'ah, not like the haram type bid'ah, right? Good innovation, people coming up with ideas of how can we structure a type of contract that is in line with Islamic principles where there's no riba, and there's no gharar, there's no high level of uncertainty, and yet both people are still benefiting from the economic contract. That's exactly what Muslim scholars had done historically. That's what Muslim society and civilization had done in the past, and things worked really, really well. And nowadays you find like some stock screens when you're investing in the stock market, and you say, hey, can I buy Google, and can I buy Amazon, and can I buy this stock or that stock or whatever it is. As long as it's not an alcohol company, as long as it's not a marijuana dispensary, as long as it's not a pornography company, as long as it's not a casino, as long as it's not a bank, because they're primarily making their money off of riba and interest-based transactions. But then you say, well, wait a minute, can I buy Apple? Because Apple actually owns a streaming service, I don't know, Apple TV or whatever it is, and some of their videos are like straight up sex scenes, like porn scenes inside those videos, and they make their money from that. So can I buy that or can I not buy that? And Apple makes so much money, right? Who's an Apple fan, by the way? Who has an Apple device? Like a lot of people, right? I do too. All right. So Apple is so successful, they make a lot of money because they're a very successful company. They have so much cash because they're doing really well. What happens to the cash that they have on hand? That cash is automatically loaned out on interest. So one of their streams of income is the amount of interest that they're collecting on the massive amount of cash that they have. Whereas like Tesla, for example, is investing so much in their infrastructure and building supercharging stations and doing all sorts of other things. They don't have that amount of cash that Apple's going to have. So they're not loaning that much money out on interest. So their streams of revenue is going to be very, very different. So you have these stock screens and you say, well, what level of acceptability is allowed here and not allowed there? That's going to play a big role. When you start investing and you start making your own money, or if you have your own money, you're going to have to make sure you're doing a Sharia-compliant stock screen to make sure that the company that you're investing in is not either paying too much riba or receiving too much riba, right? And they're in a halal, like mostly in a halal market, not alcohol or whatever it is. So these are all good things that have happened where Muslims kind of got their act together and say, hey, we can invest our money this way and we can still keep it halal, and we have good principles and 1/3 and all that stuff. You can check out Zoya Finance for a good app to check your stocks before you buy them. Where Muslims have gone wrong, and I'll just conclude with this, where Muslims have gone wrong is that the innovation that they have is not in line with the spirit of Islam. So this is what's happened. People want to buy a house, people want to buy a car, and they go, well, we're not going to go to Bank of America, and we're not going to go to Chase, we're not going to go to these other ones because there's riba, and we shouldn't be engaged in riba, et cetera, et cetera. So what do? We're going to develop an industry called Islamic finance. And Islamic finance, here's my critique now. So Islamic finance throughout the world, I'm not just talking about in America, throughout the world, someone said, hey, one person came along and established an Islamic bank and said, you know what we're going to do? We are the Islamic bank. We will take the loan from Bank of America for you, and we will sell it to you, and you're not engaging in anything sinful because you didn't take the interest-based loan. Our corporation took it on behalf of the corporation, so therefore, you got the exact same product, but there's no sin on you. This is absolutely ridiculous. Let me just put it that way. Absolutely ridiculous. And they charge you on top of that like 0.5% or 1% for rewriting a contract, which is a sham. Then someone else came up, so that's like the worst, okay? And there's an Islamic bank like that. It's just a dumb model. That's not the type of innovation that I'm talking about. Then someone else comes along and says, I have another idea, right? And people have tried this in the past. 1,300 years ago, people came up with the idea. They say, hey, you need some money. You wanna buy this phone? Yeah, I wanna buy this phone. Say, okay. I need to borrow some money. I need $100 from you, and I'll pay you back $110. And they say, but that's haram. That's riba. You can't do that. And they say, okay, I have an idea. I'm going to sell you my phone for $110, okay? And you don't have the money right now, you can pay me later. So now you have the phone, and you owe me $110. So far, so good? Transaction number 1. And then I go, hey, man, that's a nice phone. It's my phone anyways. It was my phone 10 seconds ago. Hey, that's a nice phone, man. I would like to have that. I'll buy that phone from you for $100 cash right now. And he goes, sure. So he gives me back my phone, and I give him $100, separate transaction. What's the net result? I have my phone, he has my $100 in his hand, and he owes me $110. And they said, perfect workaround to make 2 contracts combined together, and we say, but it's not riba. It was 2 separate, independent contracts. If you combine them, it looks like riba, but it's not technically. It's halal. You can't say it's haram because there were 2 separate contracts. This is what's called hila. Hila is a trick. Hila is a scheme, a way to try to get around the rules of real riba, around the rules of gharar, and say, hey, we're going to figure out a way to somehow trick the system into doing this. This is what lawyers do every single day. If you study law, this is what you're going to be doing. Companies will hire you and pay you top dollar to find little loopholes inside the law. And it's legal, and you get away with it. The difference is that you are trying to find a loophole in Allah's law. And Allah knows that you're playing games. So that's where we need to be very careful. That's where we need to go back and say, what's the function, what's the spirit of the law? I talked to you about zakah, right? You have to pay your zakah every single year. So if you have $20,000, right, what do? You got to pay 2.5% every year. And by the way, every year means every lunar year, Islamic year, lunar calendar. How many days in the Islamic lunar year? 354. So 11 days earlier than 365 solar calendar. So after 353 days, somebody came up with an idea. This was 1,350 years ago. Somebody said, I'm going to gift all my $20,000 to my wife, and then she's going to gift it back to me. I have not had that amount of money for 354 days for an entire year, therefore I don't need to pay zakah. Little trick, right? But you think Allah doesn't know? Allah knows. So what we got to do is we need to understand that these are the basic principles of Islam. There's a wisdom behind why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us not to do these things. There's economic exploitation. There's psychological manipulation of you wanting to buy things right now and you can't wait for it later. You can't really afford it, but you think it's a need. And we need to take those principles, and clever people like you who are going to be going in whatever field you're going in, some people who start to operate within the sector, you need to use your minds, come up with some contracts that will actually apply the spirit of Islamic law and not just the outward look where you play some trick around thinking that you can get around the rules. And other people who are not going to invent these contracts, but you're going to make money, you're going to be making money, you're going to get a degree, you're going to get a job at some point, you need to be investing your money because you don't want to be losing it in zakah, you want to be losing it with inflation. When you invest your money, be a little bit wise. Understand how a contract works. So when some company comes and they're like, hey, you should invest in our Islamic company X. We can invest your money for you. You should ask them, how exactly, what makes you Islamic? How do you avoid the principles of riba and gharar without doing some trick kind of workaround? So you make sure you choose how you invest your money properly so that you don't get punked. You don't get fooled. So anyways, that's my amount of time that I have. I'm going to open it up for questions. Questions, yes, sister. Alaikum assalam.
I have one question about mortgages and another question about investing in the stock market.
Yeah.
In terms of mortgages, I've heard the opinion that from Shuyukh that if you get a mortgage with riba for your primary residence and you don't profit off of this, rent it out to other people, and you're just getting it because you need the money for your primary residence, then it's excused for the one time. I've heard this opinion. I don't know if it's valid, so I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay.
And if it's not a valid opinion, then how, given that Islamic banks are basically charging riba but calling it something else, then how do you advise the Muslim community to own property? And second of all, in terms of investing in the stock market, if we invest in the S&P 500 generally, besides the HEDA ETFs, then is there a percentage of gains that we can donate to purify the overall wealth, or is that null and void and it simply has to be HEDA ETF?
Okay, good questions. So the first one is whether you can buy, is there a fatwa that you could buy a house, one house for your primary residence on a mortgage due to need? So this was a fatwa that was popularly passed by the Fatwa Council of Europe, primarily written by Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, rahimahullah. So my teacher in France actually is the one who wrote the fatwa on this and convinced Sheikh Qaradawi of why this is somehow a need, particularly for the context of Muslims in France. So Muslims in France are marginalized, they're ghettoized, they don't really have proper access to economic opportunity and things like that. So the argument basically was this. The argument was that if Muslims aren't able to live in good neighborhoods and their children go to good schools, etc., the Muslim community is going to be left behind. Therefore, it's a collective need for the entire Muslim community to be living in good neighborhoods, and the only way they can do that is if they get a riba-based mortgage. So that's the argument. And there is a fatwa that's there, and the European Fatwa Council has passed this fatwa as well. Personally, I don't agree with the fatwa. So it is there. I respect the scholars who hold the opinion, but I don't respect the opinion personally because need is usually something, there's two types of need. There's what's called haja and there's what's called darura. So if something is clear-cut haram and it's a major sin, it only becomes allowed when there's darura, which is you're really, really in danger. Your life is in danger. In the Quran it says if you're starving in the middle of the desert and you need to eat pork, then you can eat pork, right? We're not at that level when it comes to housing, right? So maybe the Muslims in France can make that argument. When I debated with him, that was part of my senior thesis actually with the Sheikh. I got to debate this fatwa. He said, okay, I'll give it to you that the Muslims in America, this shouldn't apply to them, but the Muslims in France, it applies to them. So he even conceded on that point. So I'm not convinced, but it is an opinion, okay? So how do you choose opinions? That's a whole other topic, okay? So how should Muslims buy a house then? They should buy a house either one of two ways. The best way and the correct way is to do it through a real musharaka-based model, partnership-based model, and there's two places that mainly do that. One of them is right here in Silicon Valley. It's called Amin Housing Co-op. It's a fantastic model, one of the best models out there. You have to wait in line for like 6 months before you get your house. People don't want to wait in line, or people don't want to get 20% down payment or whatever. But if you really care about your principles, you go with the best one. Second one is just started in Irvine, where I am, from one of my friends. It's called NEEYAH Fund, Neeyah. He just developed this model. They just started pretty recently. This is the ideal Islamic financing model. So this is the best option, option number one. Option number two is what's called builder financing. So builder financing, if someone's building the home and the person who's building the home is actually giving you the loan directly, it's like selling an item for two different prices. One is a payment right now, one is a deferred payment with larger. So this is actually allowed. Third-party murabaha is not allowed. Some of you, I've lost you all, and you don't know what the heck I'm talking about. But if you ever research this in detail and you're like, okay, well, what is he talking about? Or I learned a little bit more about it, you can always check the recording, inshallah, and then it'll make sense to you. So that was your first question, right? What was your second question? S&P 500. All right. So the super short answer is, it's best to get into a fund that already meets the screens. But if you're going to get into that and you're going to purify the amount, and the amount that you're going to purify becomes almost the same as the amount that you're going to purify from the halal screened ones already, then yes, it would be fine.
What's the percentage?
You would have to calculate what the percentage is based upon what the holdings of the S&P are at the time. You'd have to do your own calculations then.
But based on what the holdings are at the time that you're like...
That you had invested. That you had invested, okay. I don't know, does somebody else want to call? Because sometimes people are like, you didn't fairly call on other people. Is there some organizer here that wants to call? Yeah, so you can blame him if he didn't call on you. It's agency, it's called Tawkeel.
Mine is just a comment on top of the not a question. It's just a comment in the speak of the alarm. It's regarding...
This is called spreading risk in economics. The risk is on you now.
So I have a question. Would being a real estate agent be haram then, since you're indirectly encouraging mortgage-based loans?
No, so you're a real estate agent, you're not indirectly encouraging interest-based loans. What you're primarily doing as a real estate agent is showing somebody that this is a home and it's a nice looking home and you want to buy it. Where their funding is coming from, that doesn't actually directly concern you. So if you can, and most real estate agents, what they do is they will help connect you with find you and help you secure the funding and fill out the documents and all that. If you can avoid that, it's better to avoid that. But since technically the primary function of a real estate agent is to show you the home and what everything is about the home, and they're not the banker that's designed to get you the funding, it doesn't matter where their funding is going to be coming from. Yeah.
We can take one more question, inshallah.
I'll stay after too if anyone wants to ask me privately questions, inshallah.
Musharaka is when basically, they're renting out the house, and you're also buying a portion of the house until you eventually buy the entire house. Am I
Correct. That's musharaka mutanaqisa, which means diminishing partnership, yes. Yeah.
All right, we can take one more question. One in the back, all the way over there. Please project your voice too, so we can call you.
It's kind of jacked up.
So if you're working in like a tech job in some capacity for example, a financial company that might also deal in interest, but your job doesn't have anything to do with that in the company.
Yeah, so that would be fine, because so as long as the company that you work for doesn't primarily make all of their money from like a haram way, like let's say you're working for a brothel, like a prostitution house, right? Like all their money is coming in from something that's haram, and you're like, well, I just developed the registration app for people to check in or something like that, right? No. So you should not be doing that, right? But if you're working for a company that, let's say, is making, let's say they're selling coffee, but then they're selling alcohol as well on the side. And you're like, okay, well, 50% of their proceeds are coming, from coffee and 50% is coming from alcohol, but they're paying me and all you do is you do their accounting. You're not encouraging their alcohol business. You're not doing marketing for them or anything. You're just looking at all their books to make sure everything adds up. So you have nothing to do with their actual sale of alcohol. You can safely assume that the money that they're paying you is coming from the profit that is coming from the coffee rather than coming from the alcohol. And likewise, if you're developing neutral technology that could be potentially used either in banking or another sector, then developing a neutral technology, even if it's being used for now by that other company, that's going to also be fine.
So this is majority, like if it's more than half, then this.
No, I just give an example. It's not the majority, even if it was more than that. So let's say alcohol sales were 60% and coffee was 40%, and all you do is you clean their parking lot. When they pay you, you know that at least 40% of their money, you're not getting paid 40% of their coffee sales, right? So the money that's coming in, as long as the amount of money that's coming to you is going to be enough to cover the halal portion that they have, you have nothing to do with that alcohol by cleaning their parking lot.
At what point then does it become like, let's say there's now like bars like 90% alcohol, let's say 10% water. At that point, the alcohol is so much like.
Yeah, then it's going to be a no.
So at what percentage then do you determine that?
It's on a case-by-case basis. Determine on a case-by-case basis.
All right, Jazakallah khair, everyone. Please give it up for.